Ah, yes, no Gandolfo, but we're stuck with this music. This is the Horse Racing Happy Hour, hanging out with Matthew DeSantis. My name's Louie. You know where we are. Studios of ESPN 680 and 105.7 here in Louisville, Kentucky. Matthew, of course, there on Long Island. We're getting ready for races that will happen about a mile from where I'm sitting here under the Twin Spires on Saturday at Churchill Downs. We have an actual grade one of older horses. I can't believe it. We'll get into that one, of course, and the Stephen Foster, but 6 stakes races on the card for them graded. I think only Woodlawn has more graded stakes over the weekend, but we will get into the pick 6 there at Churchill on Saturday. I mentioned Matthew from NYRA Bets. Any good promos we need to know about up at your place?
Yeah, we got some 10% exacta boosts actually all weekend long. So for your vertical players, make sure to opt in, and very simple. Just opt in, play some exactas, and get a little extra money.
Yeah, I like that a lot, frankly. So there you go. I assume I will be seeing you in New Jersey in a few weeks.
Yes, at the Haskell, presented by NYRA Bets, and I will, be there with bells on, and always love to make it down to the Garden State, and a really great race last year, of course, thrilling victory by Dornick over Mindframe, who, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, we're going to be talking about a little bit on this episode in that Stephen Foster.
We have a very stirring edition of Buy or Sell for this week's version of
I can't wait.
Foster. It's going to be spectacular. I think you will appreciate the very minutia detail that Louie went into to get ready for Stephen Foster Day. But hey, man, I wanted to open just, you're up there in New York. You're on the ground there. I was not at Saratoga this year for the Belmont yet to make the trip. I'll have to do it next year, since I know, at least I'm really hoping it's the last time they do it, because I do love Belmont Park that much. But that is neither here nor there. The experience over that weekend, man, I just wanted to ask you, you've been to both now. How was it different this year?
Yeah, I think last year there was a sense of, oh my gosh, we have to get here for this. It was the first time there was a lot of excitement, and it resulted in just an absolutely packed environment. I mean, if you've ever been to Saratoga, anybody listening, it usually is a pretty free-flowing place. There's a lot of room in that picnic area. You can walk around with your family. It's really approachable. I remember last year on Belmont Stakes Day, it was a nightmare walking around. It was just packed. And this year, the crowds were a little bit diminished. But interestingly enough, I think people had a better time because there wasn't a 150-person line to go to the bathroom. And it was interesting. I actually talked to someone who said, we sold more Belmont Breezes this year than we did last year because people weren't turned off by waiting in a little bit in line like they might have been. So it was a really fun weekend. Obviously, unfortunate about some of the weather, but overall, it was still a great weekend of racing. And yeah, we're going to do it one more year next year, and then we're moving just right down the road from me to Belmont Park. We can't wait for the new Belmont to be open.
Yeah, I was just talking with John Ked, who's the COO over at Breeders' Cup on Monday, and just you can even feel it amongst the BC folks about how excited they are to get to the city and to the new place. He talked, what was interesting, Matthew caught me off guard a little bit about how he talked about it, was he's convinced, and it's interesting to hear because all of us who are in this, and especially in the major markets, are around tracks that are older, right? So I'm around Churchill, I'm around Keeneland, I'm around even a place like Ellis Park is really, really old, right? And so we get some of the new rebuilds. I think of Turfway as the first one of this generation that went back from the ground, right? Getting with Belmont and Pimlico for sure. And, I guess before that, I should include Gulfstream Park for sure as part of one of those rebuilds that happened, not a renovation, but rather a rebuild as well. But I don't think I got to old Gulfstream.
I never did. Yeah, I
don't think I did. And I think that's why it didn't register for me in my mind. But it's a thing where he talked about sight lines for on-track patrons. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're actually worrying about what people are going to see when they show up to the place. And one of the things I always hate, Matthew, is when something lulls in horse racing, we just assume it's gone forever. We can never get it. It's done forever. It's like, or we could do things like, I don't know, renovate the darn places, make them nicer, make it places that people want to hang out. Hopefully that's what Belmont will be.
I think that is exactly what Belmont is going to be. And there are a few things that frustrate me more and I'm sure bettors can kind of speak to this as well. When you're watching a race replay, when you're watching a race live, and then they just disappear behind a tree for the better part of 5 minutes. And you're just like, what the heck is going on right now on the backside? Because I can't see anything. They're running behind a giant sign. They're running behind a screen. They're running behind trees. And you miss out on the action, quite frankly, as a fan. And when you're there on the day of the race and you're trying to watch a race, I mean, it's one of the reasons, not to go too far afield on this, but why a city like Washington, D.C. is one of my favorite cities, because it was designed from the ground up with these beautiful sight lines where you could just look down these boulevards that go for 2 miles in any direction, as opposed to Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, that are cobbled together cities that kind of grew over time. And so just being intentional about the design of the new Belmont Park, I think, is something that's really exciting. And obviously putting patrons first is always a good thing.
Look, the story of the weekend of Belmont was, of course, Sovereignty winning after the rest and Journalism running second again. But how good is Raging Torrent, I think, is the more interesting question coming out of that race, because, we try to figure out these Breeders' Cup fields, as I just mentioned, and you try to figure out who it is that's going to be that horse, whatever that is. And why it is so fun to talk Stephen Foster in a 1 1/8 race and eventually the Classic and those things.
Yeah.
A lot of races on that Breeders' Cup undercard too that are 1 turn or 1 mile or less, that kind of thing as well. Where does Raging Torrent fit for you right now?
You rarely see a horse pack its form quite the way that he has. Winning the Malibu, going overseas to win the Godolphin Mile, and then coming back to New York to win the Met Mile. I mean, those 3 races back to back to back put him up there with anybody. I mean, we just saw a horse like Rebel's Romance win at Royal Ascot last week, and we always marvel at his ability to kind of go to Hong Kong, go to Dubai, go to Europe, come here to North America and win and run his best race. And for a horse like Raging Torrent to do it for trainer Doug O'Neill, I think that horse, when he gets out on the front end, I heard one of the owners say it to O'Neill. He goes, "Man, when that horse gets out up front, he's a stubborn son of a gun." And, he really is. When he gets out up front, he's a different type of runner. And, he's certainly going to be somebody you got to look for in that Breeders' Cup Mile. Now, it's going to be interesting. That's a 2-turn race out there. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes some of the dynamics. But, yeah, he's a good one. And then I'll be honest, the other one who it was a 3-horse field. You don't want to get too crazy. But, man alive, does Mark Casse have a good one in Nitrogen. That horse, I mean, you don't want to overstate it, but if I was Casse, I know he's going to keep her on the turf, but I'd run her against some of the fillies in the 3-year-old division on the dirt as well, especially with Good Cheer having not returned to the work tab. Immersive looks like she might need a race or two to get back into top form. That 3-year-old filly division looks wide open, and she's the best 3-year-old filly I've seen to this point.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment, especially. Did you find yourself rooting for Journalism just because he was the one who took the trip to Baltimore?
Well, he was also my top pick. So, yes, I found myself rooting for Journalism.
It's a good reason. It's a solid reasoning for you. Yeah.
But, no, I did. You respect a horse that tries all 3, and he was the only one that did. And you respect it even more when you see how the connections handled him, that they clearly had a plan in place. Mike McCarthy had that horse looking fantastic leading up. And I will say I was watching the walkover with my colleague Kaylee Shapiro, and she's a big Sovereignty supporter. That was her horse since last October. Journalism has been my horse since Los Al Futurity. And she looked back at me after they all walked by, and she goes, "Our 2 horses just look better than everybody else." And I said, "Yeah, they do." And sometimes it's that simple. I think Baeza is a really nice horse, but probably still needs some time to grow out. It's a little bit more of a late developing type. But yeah, Journalism, hard not to root for that horse. And hopefully we see him back here in the Travers or something along those lines here on the East Coast coming up.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they choose to ship him back east, right? If he ends up in one of those races, or if it's hey, we're thinking Breeders' Cup with this horse, and we're just gonna, we're gonna do the big cap, and we're gonna do those races, or the Pacific Classic, excuse me.
Yeah,
we're gonna do that and kind of get him into that. He doesn't strike me as a horse that's gonna want to take months off between races. I think he wants the action of being involved in races.
I think he does too. And McCarthy kind of lamented the point that there's not better spots for him out west right now at the Del Mar meet, and that he probably would have to ship to the Haskell, to the Jim Dandy, to the Travers if he wants to keep running. And I mean, the problem potentially is you keep running up against Sovereignty, who just, appears to be the class of this group. And so maybe you can manage things where, well, maybe Sovereignty skips the Jim Dandy and just goes to the Travers, and maybe we pop in for the Jim Dandy and get a grade 2, get a win. And maybe we, focus on, the Pennsylvania Derby maybe after that or something along those lines. So, there's some ways that he can maneuver if you don't want to go against older horses maybe before that Pacific Classic.
Yeah, I think we'll see Journalism almost certainly in the Pacific Classic. It just makes too much sense for them and the connections and where they're based and all the things. Plus, it's a lot of money and it's a winnable race for them. Let's be really clear about what it is, right? And a shipping to Philadelphia is different than shipping from LA to San Diego.
Yes,
on that line. Yeah, no, and I got to say, Matthew, it's funny that you mentioned, being with Kaylee at Saratoga and you see these horses and you say, that's it. That's when I chose Sovereignty for the Derbies, when I saw him in the mornings.
Yeah.
And I just saw him and I went, I'll tell you, I got a text right after the Derby from Mike Gandolfo, who was on this show for years. And all it was him putting a heart on a tweet or a text from Tuesday that I sent him that said, Sovereignty got that ass on him. And that's all I wrote him. All I wrote him was Sovereignty got that ass on him. And then the horse used all of it and got to the front of the Kentucky Derby. And then again in the Belmont for sure. Just in general.
Yeah.
You've seen a lot of these 3-year-olds. You've been to Belmonts and all these things. How good is Sovereignty to you?
He's one of the best 3-year-olds I've seen in the last 10 years. He's that good. I mean, he is a ridiculously talented horse. And I think what really made it stand out even that much more in the Belmont was that he showed a different dimension, sitting so much closer to the pace than he had previously. And I think that's why I always sided with journalism a little bit, because I thought he's going to have that cushion. He's going to be up 3-4 lengths on Sovereignty. But here's the thing. If those two are anywhere close to each other coming at the top of the stretch, Sovereignty is going to win every single time. Journalism's got to have a 4 or 5 length cushion, and then maybe he can hold off that late charge. But if they're on relatively even terms or Sovereignty's 2 lengths back, it's over. I mean, that horse just has, and you feel bad for a horse like Journalism, who is so clearly better than everybody else in this crop outside of Sovereignty. And it really does feel a little bit like a Secretariat Sham situation, where it's like, Sham would have been this amazing horse if not for the fact he was born the same year as Secretariat. And so it's really interesting to see. But Sovereignty, incredibly talented. You felt so good for Bill Mott, too. I think, just winning that Kentucky Derby, but then coming back to win the Belmont. Godolphin, obviously, they have big plans for this horse. And, from a pedigree standpoint, this horse is a monster. And, has a big future off the track as well already.
You mentioned the Godolphin angle and part of this, and it's why when we heard they weren't going to Baltimore, I was 0% surprised, right?
Yeah.
I'm just that part of that story was not surprising to me, but frankly, I remember back Auguste Rodin, who just ran in the Breeders' Cup, and how the Irish talk about the bloodline there, what they're trying to build with their bloodlines as far as those kinds of horses, what he means as the next great horse. You get the sense with Godolphin that after Into Mischief, they're looking for that type of horse, and they do think that Sovereignty is it, right?
Yeah.
They think he's the next in whatever they're personally building in their thing. I don't want to compare them to an entire breeding program like Ireland or something, but frankly, they might be just as big. But frankly, just how much access they have to the top, broodmares in the world and those sorts of things, what they'll be able to build with a horse like Sovereignty, at least what they're hoping they're going to be able to build. That's what they're thinking right now. And that's why when Baltimore's decision happened, 0% for me.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. They have their eyes on a much bigger prize, and it's not even just on the track. It is building a whole new generation of bloodlines that they're going to have. And we all had talked about how Godolphin was in search for that Kentucky Derby victory that had kind of been so elusive for them, and then finally getting it. Obviously, they knew this was the one that they had there in mind the entire time. And listen, these things aren't by accident. I remember talking to my colleague, who I know you know as well, Darwin Vizcaya, last year at Saratoga. And Darwin came up to me on a random Thursday in July and said, Billy Mott's got this horse that Junior's riding in the morning, Sovereignty. Junior says he's the best horse he's ever been on. And these things don't just happen out of nowhere. And the Godolphin people have known that this horse was a monster for a while. And I've been trying to play against him because he's got that off the pace running style that, like, a little bit like Sierra Leone, that you're like, is he going to get home? Is he going to get the trip? Et cetera. And I'm giving up trying to beat him, which is now exactly when you want to play against him. So once I hop on the bandwagon, then that's the curse, the kiss of death. So,
the hope was, he gets to Saratoga, graveyard of favorites, that kind of thing. And maybe we'll beat him here in the Belmont. I picked him anyway, just because he's got that ass on him. But the time off too, all the things. But anyways, the real reason I picked him, Matthew, was we talked to Junior the Monday before. Yeah, and he was. I'll just use the word. He was arrogant. Like we're winning this. Like we're done. We're done here. Like we're winning. If he shows up at all, we're winning this race. And I was like, oh. And I got to ask the follow-up question. If this were at Belmont Park going a mile and a half, he's like, oh, we'd win by 10. Like he's just like we'd win by 10. And by the way, he's probably right.
Like, yeah, because journalism would find out Baeza wasn't making up ground, and he was going to keep rolling, and he looked ears pricked up and ready to roll coming across the wire. So he's just such an impressive horse. And one of the things that Mott mentioned, which was surprising, because again, you don't hear Mott make many big time quotes. A lot of times when you talk to the media, very grounded guy, very realistic. A lot of times when he talked about how this horse came out of that Kentucky Derby more aggressive, training even better than he had. I saw journalism the Tuesday, I want to say, before the Belmont Stakes, and I thought, man, that's as good a looking horse as I've seen.
Oh, yeah.
I then saw Sovereignty come into the paddock on Wednesday. Sovereignty walked into the paddock. His ears were pricked, his muscles were rippling, and he just looked like he owned the track. And he just had that. You don't see many horses have that, and he just had that aura about him, and it is something special to see. And I hope fans can appreciate this, because we don't see horses like this come along, not even every year, every 10 years.
White Abarrio and Fierceness were the favorites in that Met Mile before Raging Torrent got the lead, kept the lead. Worried about either of them?
Not really. I think it was kind of inevitable. Fierceness might bounce a little bit off of that effort, and the Ali Sheba coming off the bench and running that huge race. And that was also one of those where I think Fierceness too. I've always said he's a little bit post dependent. I never like him when he's in an inside post position. He likes to be outside of other horses, kind of in the clear. It was a short field, so it wasn't like he had a bad trip by any stretch, but I just think he needs the right type of setup sometimes. White Abarrio, I talked to the owners actually right after the race. They said he just never took to the track, with the conditions that day, and just looked like a kind of a one-paced horse. And they said, we'll be back in the Whitney, and seemed very, very confident that the horse came out of the race fine. So I think long-term, I also think White Abarrio is better going a little bit longer. I don't think a mile is really his best distance either.
No, I'm with you. I think they were hoping that like 1.5 turn thing there at Saratoga would play to it, but it just wasn't enough. And frankly,
no,
I don't. You would have to find a pretty short list of horses that were going to beat Raging Torrent on that day. I mean, that's the other part of this too. I should be very clear about this. I'm not sure either of those horses would beating Raging Torrent in that race. And I don't know that you could have brought over Niso said his best or any of those kinds of, in general, you would have been hard pressed. Maybe a Mind Frame, maybe Mind Frame at his very, very best in a mile.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Mind Frame and Nisus are the two that come to mind who could have done it maybe at a mile. Again, if they fire their A race and they really get their spot. The horse that it was funny because I had the right idea on the wrong horse. I was against Fierceness. I was against White Abarrio. I like Just a Touch quite a bit in that race.
Sure.
Ran third. Yep. And, so it's one of those things where I beat the two short prices and then just didn't have the right one up top. But, right idea, wrong horse.
Yeah, no, I've never been there, Matthew. I can't imagine how that.
I have no idea. I can't relate. Yeah,
no, never something that ever happens to me every single day. By the way, today's episode, if you are heading to Foster Day here in Louisville, it's presented by J. Shepherd Cigars over there, 1429 Bardstown Road in the Highlands. Easy stop on your way to the track, and if you mention this show, mention me. Whatever you got to do. Free cigar with any purchase over there. Our friend J. Shepherd over there as well. We'll get into our handicapping now. Takeout rates at Churchill Downs. If you are not familiar with our circuit here in Kentucky, different track to track. The CDI tracks are different as well. So you have to actually pay attention place to place. Turfway's takeouts different than Churchill's, for example. But 15% on the pick fives here, very playable. 17.5 on Win Play Show. And they are going to have, Matthew, on Saturday and Sunday, like they will the entire Ellis Park meet, a turf pick $3 minimum, 15% takeout. I tend to like those bets, Matthew, but I tend not to play them because I feel like only the very best handicappers are in those pools. And so for parimutuel purposes, all the smartest people are playing those, play because they all think like me. They're like, oh, high minimum, low takeout. Oh, this is going to be great. And then all of the best people are in there and I never get paid as much as I want to if I actually do it. One of those things. So, but that'll be happening this weekend. That will start with race 8, as will the pick 6, the Tepin. It is for 3-year-old fillies. We're going a mile on the turf course there, which, by the way, I have made fun of in the past. Not this year. It's been spectacular this meet. They have done a great job with the turf course here in Louisville at Churchill Downs. And so actually, I'm sorry, I said the Tepin. We're starting with race 7. That's the Fleur de Lis. That starts the pick 6. The turf pick 3 will start the next race. Return of Torpedo Anna here. How are you handicapping that last race?
I was against her that race. I was actually single to Raging Sea, and so I looked smart that day. But that was It was one where I had a feeling they were going to do exactly what they did, which was I had a feeling Chad's horses were going to gang up on her, and Randomizer was going to make it tough on the front end, and Raging Sea was going to come in and sweep up the mess on the back end. And what I didn't expect is for her to turn in that bad of a performance and be just completely empty. Although you look back at that race, man, she took quite a bump going into that first turn. And I remember, if you remember back a couple of years ago when Fierceness ran in that Holy Bull, he got sandwiched between two horses coming out of the gate and kind of was empty coming for home. And I think a lot of that was maybe got his wind knocked out of him, just didn't really never got comfortable. Seemed like Anna might have had a similar situation there. And, it's one of those, it's so bad, you almost just want to draw a line through it and go back to the drawing board. But there is no denying the numbers that she's gotten progressively slower since running against the boys in that Travers last year when she almost beat Fierceness. So for me, the mile and an eighth and all of that, it's tough, especially at such a short price on the morning line at 3 to 5. And she's going to take a ton of money. And you have a couple of horses that seem to be, in good form in terms of Jin as well as Royal Spa. So for me, I'm going to try to beat her again and try to use those two horses to do it probably.
Is there any chance in this race, just try to figure out what the pace scenario is going to be? I imagine, frankly, in this one, Brian Hernandez Jr., of course, is just going to try to get Torpedo Anna to the front so she doesn't have to deal with that stuff again, right?
100%.
Yeah, I think that's what he's going to do. Is there any chance there's a horse like Taxed that goes with her is right there? Is it a Jin like you mentioned? Because I think a lot of people had questions after that double dog dare, and I think it's legitimate because that mile and a 16th at Keeneland is so different with that first finish line than the mile and a 16th, for example, at Churchill, where you get the full stretch when you run those races. But I thought she showed herself well in the Shawnee here at Churchill Downs. Royal Spa picking up the pieces at the end there. Are there horses that can go with her? And do you agree that they're just going to try to get her in front?
They're going to get her in front. I think that's the plan. If you're Brian Hernandez Jr., when you have the best horse, just keep the horse out of trouble. That's the name of the game. So I think that's the plan. I do think a horse like Jin can go with her to some extent, especially drawing to her outside. And then a horse like Royal Spa, that horse has shown good speed going a mile before. And with that inside rail draw, you figure there's going to be some intentionality there to get out on the front end. So, one of the things that Richie Migliori, who's one of our great analysts up here at NYRA, always talks to me about is he goes, in short fields, that's when favorites get in the most trouble. He goes, because everybody knows who's the favorite. And everybody just zeroes in on that horse and makes it as tough on them as possible. And I could see Royal Spa and Jin trying to make it tough for Torpedo to get out there on the front end. And maybe Brian uses a little bit more of her early than he wants to. And you have a horse like Jin or Royal Spa kind of pressing her the entire way. And again, the mile and the eighth, the fact that she came up empty at a mile and a 16th last time. Now we're going a mile and an eighth. Again, I just think I find myself rooting for her, but as a player, I'm going to be playing against her, I think, in this spot.
Okay, there you go. He's Matthew DeSantis. He's with NYRA Bets. And of course, I'm Louie. This is the Horse Racing Happy Hour. Thanks for hanging out with us. We head to race 8 now at Churchill Downs. I should have my overlays. You know what I do? I do these very nice scrolling banners for my other shows, and then I get lazy when I do the Horse Racing Happy Hour, which is unacceptable. If Barry Spears were on here, I'd be serious, but Matthew's on here, so I'm not being serious. Ridiculous. We're going a mile on the turf in race 8 for 3-year-old fillies. It's called the Tepin. It's $250,000 on the line as well. Fun field in here, Matthew. I thought this was a really, really cool one. You get Lush Lips out of that Edgewood. Vixen, of course, also ran in the Edgewood, ran third. I wanted to ask, essentially, there's no nitrogen. Do we just run back the Edgewood here?
In some ways, I think so. And I think the thing is, there could be a fair amount of pace in this race with regards to Lush Lips. And you have a horse like Ninth Island on the outside who's going to want to go pretty forward as well. And even something stronger is a horse that's stretching out from sprinting last time. And so a horse like Lush Lips is interesting. I think when she's at her best is when she's up on the front end. Now, she showed last time she can pass horses coming from off the pace in that Edgewood, which is good. But because of that, I really kind of like the other Cassie horse, Vixen, who I always feel was just in the shadow of her stablemate all the time. And if not for her, might have had a couple more wins. And so I think just, it's splitting hairs in terms of 9-5 on Lush Lips, 2-1 on Vixen on the morning line. But I'll lean towards the other Cassie runner in this one. But I do think the top two from the Edgewood that are running back here are kind of clearly the top two in this race.
Yeah, it's hard to find too many other places to go. I think, for example, Love You Anyway is 5-1 because Louis Saez is aboard. Right. He's spectacular. I think he's 5-1 because of who he is and how well he's been riding. And by the way, I'm not mad at that. I get it. He's won races at Churchill this meet that aren't just, okay, Louie was on the best horse and he won. No. Louie was not on the best horse for many of these wins, frankly. It is already 44 wins on this. He and Jose Ortiz certainly going for the riding title this spring there. Something I'm going to ask you about, and it's going to be something that we ask about in other races as well. Some of these California shippers. So favor to you on the outside. Antonio Fresu just won the riding title at Santa Anita, comes to Louisville for the day. Phil D'Amato's got a bunch. He's got a string out here in Kentucky now. We see this all the time in California where these horses go 6 furlongs and then suddenly they turn into milers on the turf. And they do it at like $134 at Santa Anita because apparently the grass is made of lightning. I had no idea, but and I'm not making up any of that, especially.
No, you're not.
So but how do we handicap a horse like that? Because this is an angle, frankly, two sprints around, especially 20%. They do this all the time in California. Could that be the long shot here?
Well, it's interesting. That's the horse I actually have second.
Okay, there you go.
So I think that horse has a real shot in this race. And it's interesting because normally it's an angle I play against. And the angle I play against is just West Coast turf horses coming to the Midwest and to the East. And it's just because, like you said, the turf courses out there are just different. Maybe you could compare it to Gulfstream Park in terms of very similar sort of a setup. But when they come to Saratoga, when they come to the old Belmont Park, when they come to Aqueduct, when they come to Churchill and Keeneland, it's just a deeper turf course. It's a thicker turf course. You can't go 23 and 46 and expect to finish as strong as they do. And stretching out from 6 furlongs isn't going to work when you have these horses with this massive turn of foot that start coming at you. And so I think she's real live in this particular spot. I really like her, but I am a little cautious playing her up top. But I think at a little bit of a price, she's easily the most interesting alternative, I think, to the top 2.
Phil D'Amato 3 for 12 this meeting at Churchill Downs with 7 of his horses hitting the board in those races. We moved to race 9. This is the start of the late pick 4 there. Again, that was the start of the turf pick 3 in race 8. We'll do the late pick 4 here. Pretty playable 22% takeout on the pick 4. You're better off playing the pick 5 for sure. The Kelly's Landing 6.5 furlongs here. It is a grade 3, $250,000 in the kitty in this one, man. Booth is clearly the class. To me, Matthew, in this race, we watched him get it done at Pimlico. Steve Asmussen's numbers are down at Churchill Downs, and I don't mind saying that once in a while nepotism gets in the way. And I think there's a bit of Asmussen combinations that are not working at a super high level right now at Churchill Downs. They worked last year, and I think they do work in some spots, but we're talking about a grade 3 here. Certainly it's a sprint. We don't have to do like a mile and a half on the turf or anything, and there's a lot of timing issues and whatever else. Is Booth the class? Is he worth singling? What do you think here?
He is the class. He reminds me a little bit of a horse like Sovereignty for me, a horse like in Italian, if you remember her from a couple of years ago. Horses that I try to beat all the time, and then I just give up. And all right, fine. Just because I was convinced I was going to beat this horse.
A little submission, little people's elbow from our guy, Booth. The Booth elbow. That's exactly right.
The Booth elbow. Yeah. I mean, I was so against him, and I was all over Epic Ride in that last race, and just thought that, you get pressed a little bit more for fractions, and then he got loose on the lead, and it's just same song, second verse. And it's tough. I mean, I want to like a horse like Dr. Venkman quite a bit for Mark Platt and Antonio Fresu. That's the kind of obvious alternative. And that's a horse I've always liked a lot out in the West Coast, going back to, even that, San Diego handicap, going out there in the tropical blend from a couple of years ago, is second back from the layoff, lost to Nisos. I don't think there's any harm in saying that was a good loss, especially coming off that long of a layoff. And I think if you're going to try to beat Booth, it's going to be with him. I don't really see not a lot of other creative ways to go, but I do think I agree with everything you said leading up to this race in terms of the angles that are just not really playing off for Asmussen right now. And, Eric does seem to have a good handle on this horse in particular, and he kind of pretty straightforward. Just get to the front and go. And he knows how to do that with him. And, it makes him dangerous in this race. And, the question is, can a horse like the 4 Roll-On Big Joe really apply pressure? Can Auto the Conqueror apply a pressure? And will they? Will they kind of fall on their swords to some extent? And will they kind of go and press this horse and maybe lose the battle and lose the war as well, but soften up Booth enough for a horse coming from off the pace to be able to win? And I think that's always the calculation that jockeys and trainers are making of, like, how much do we use up our horse to beat the favorite if we know we're not even going to be the ones who ultimately benefit from that? So, or are we going to get some more timid rides of people just kind of tracking off a booth, in which case it's over?
I tend to think of jockeys and their influence on a race like I think of a manager in Major League Baseball over an entire season, which is in 162 games, a manager might be worth 6-7 wins, something like that.
Fair.
With jockeys, and I'm getting at this because of Durante on the outside. And yes, I'm saying Durante because we're going back to Del Mar for the Breeders' Cup this year. Jose Ortiz got them out last time for David Jacobson, and this horse was just a little bit different. Broke unbelievably quickly out of the gate in that one. And the splits on that race are absolutely absurd. But he was part of all the race, all the things. Did that just work out where he was, in your mind at least, it was just so fast he was able to pick up those pieces and get away with it? Or is this a repeatable kind of performance? I lean toward the latter, frankly.
So my concern is whether David Jacobson horses have repeatable efforts. And, that's always been an issue with him is, can his horses stack up 3-4 really good wins in a row? Now we've seen it do it with a horse like Banishing, who really I was kind of always a little hesitant to support, and that horse kept getting better and better and better until that last time out. But I mean, that horse really strung together, 5, 6, 7 really good starts. So he's just a horse that I have a hard time kind of grappling with, because if you look at the speed figures, they're still pretty light compared to the rest of the field. He only got an 88 for that Aristides. And so you look at Dr. Venkman, you look at Booth, you look at Roll On Big Joe, they all got bigger numbers than that. And you go, can you get faster off of that? I do think drawing to the outside, having Jose up again, all positives for sure, especially a little bit of a price at 8-1.
What do you think of like an Otto the Conqueror? Hasn't been great the last 2 times, but does like Churchill Downs, gets Flavian Pratt in this spot. Any shot for him? 15-1 for Steve Asmussen?
It's a horse that I always like going back to that Springboard Mile. I thought that was just such a gutsy effort going back to that, that race that was a long time ago now. But I always thought, man, when they cut this horse back to sprinting, he's going to be real dangerous, and just hasn't really quite worked out the way that I had hoped. And, he's a big price, obviously. I think he's a horse, again, could sit a decent trip, maybe sitting just off the pace of Booth, and, maybe pick up some pieces. Again, maybe enrich your vertical wagers a little bit, throw them in some exactas and tries at a big price.
Race 10 starts the late pick 3 here. Wise Dan, it's a grade 2 mile and a 16th on the turf course for 4 and up. We're still running 4 and ups here in Kentucky, in case you were wondering.
Good for you guys.
I think we're the last place. How about that? We're holding back the 3-year-olds. How's that? A little hold. Grade 2, $500,000 here. Matthew, are we potentially overlooking Fort Washington? Is the first question I have in here. He'll break from the 8 here. Junior Alvarado in for Saturday to ride here. This is a horse that won the Canadian Turf and the Dinner Party back-to-back over, frankly, very different conditions in South Florida and then in Baltimore. We're looking at Miami-type conditions here for Saturday. Very, very hot, thunderstorms, random pop-up showers. Any chance Fort Washington is actually the 6-1 got to include in this race?
Yes, is the short answer to that question. Listen, if you ever see me on the side of the road and I've hit hard times, it's because I've bet on too many Shug McGahee horses on the turf. I will always bet Shug on the turf, especially going along on the turf. I love this horse. I had him last time out in that dinner party. I just was all over this horse. He's got a big late kick, and I think maybe you question whether or not he gets the pace to run into in this race. That might be a little bit of the question of whether or not a horse might be able to control things up front and maybe not give him the conditions that he would like in terms of closing into it. But man, it's tough. I like that. He's so consistent too. He just turns in every effort's a strong one. And, honestly, those last couple of races are more than good enough to win here. I think it's 6-1. And when if you're playing horizontally in terms of those pick 5s, pick 6s, he's a must include for me.
All right. So right next to him is Brilliant Birdie, who I think has a chance to inherit the lead in this one. Was on the lead for all of the Arlington until the very last moment when Mercante overtook there. By the way, we're seeing in this part of the country, at least, not a name I'm sure on the East Coast, West Coast, whatever, that people know terribly well. Did have a mount for Whit Beckman in the Derby this year, but Joe Ramos, who is the leading rider currently at Horseshoe Indianapolis of all things, has been riding down here in some interesting spots as well, has been riding Mercante for Brian Nippenberg here. And it's interesting to watch Joe. He was also up there for the Ohio Derby Day and those kinds of things. We're seeing him get more of these sorts of spots Matthew, and obviously I'll be up there for Indiana Derby week next week. I'm interested in him, and he and Mercanti, the timing and everything else just seems to work really, really well. But Brilliant Birdie, I think, might inherit the lead. Do you expect Mercanti and a Brilliant Birdie to be on the front, and then a horse like, Fort Washington, who likes to close from a bit back, is just going to have to do that even at a mile on 16th there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's when I look at kind of how the race shape plays out. I mean, that certainly seems to be the case, that those two are going to be up there on the front end dictating terms, and maybe there's another runner who goes up there up on the front end, but I could see those two battling things out. And it's so interesting about Brilliant Birdie because the wins that this one's had are coming from off the pace, but like you said, kind of inherited the lead last time and ran really well. Didn't get lost in the lead or anything like that. Just got overtaken by Mercante. And I noted the Joe Ramos change as well, that when Ramos took over this horse, they just seemed to really have a good connection. Won 3 out of 4, and the one loss was by less than a length. And so this is a horse that I think maybe has surprised some people, kind of come out of nowhere a little bit. I mean, again, Brian Nippenberg, not exactly a household name. And so this is one where, you expect, well, Cherie DeVoe and Shug McGahee and, the other big names in this spot. And then you got Nippenberg and Ramos coming in with a horse like Mercante. And, listen, he hasn't really done much wrong. I mean, I think the only concern is the price. I mean, if you just go, do I really want to take 5-2 on a horse like this? Or do I want to take Brilliant Birdie at 3-1 or Fort Washington at 6-1, or even a horse that I also like, that I feel like I've been chasing for a while, Laganos at 6-1.
I agree with
a horse that I've always been high on. Those are, I think, better value plays from a standpoint of percentage odds of winning the race.
Yeah, Laganos made me look really smart in the Commonwealth in November. Like, really smart. Yeah. That horse came in 0 for 9 for the year. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah, but that Bryant Station, it was such a good race at Keatla. Did you see how he galloped out? It's going to happen. And I remember Tony Kalo being like, yeah, sure, buddy. Yeah, there he goes. There he goes. He's
and listen,
he's never going to miss the board. That's really the thing about Laganos. Like, just throw him in your exacta, throw him in your tries, just do it. Yeah. And frankly, in route turf races, I tend to bet those horses, Matthew, that I know are going to be there at the end.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's why I think of Fort Washington. That's why I think of Laganos at 6-1. Just make a lot of sense because they're going to be there. They don't turn in bad efforts. And if things break their way and they get the right trip and maybe the fractions get a little too fast up front, then suddenly, you're talking about a horse that can bring home, get home at a little bit of a decent price. And when you're talking about a sequence where maybe some favorites do pretty well, getting a 5-1, 6-1 winner is really all you need to really make the sequence pretty profitable.
No, that's exactly right. We move to the late double. It starts with a race called the Stephen Foster. It's a grade 1, of course, was not always a grade 1, but I'm glad that it's back to that level. $1 million on the line here. And Matthew, the last race was very American level grade 2 turf race. I'm not hating on it at all. It was very grade 2, very those things. This is a grade 1 plus, man. For the time of year, for all of the things, this is the kind of race, frankly, those of us who love this crazy thing called horse racing and everything else in this country, especially, we've been begging for this, what we used to call the older dirt handicap division. We've been begging for this, to get races like this, man. And we're getting them over and over this year. I'm not even going to call it getting spoiled because frankly, we put in the work for the last 10 years of not getting these races. And so it's nice to get them, again. So we're going to play our game that we always play on this show, the buy or sell. Can he win or not? And it's a Stephen Foster theme. If you did not know, Stephen Foster, of course, wrote My Old Kentucky Home, for which, of course, they named this race after him. And we sing that, of course, before the Derby. He also wrote Oh, Susanna and Camptown Races. And these are, by the way, these are 170-year-old songs that all of us still know all the words to.
Bangers.
Banger's a good word. I agree. All right. So in Camptown Races, of course, it's about wagering.
Yeah.
And so what does he encourage the crowd to do? Bet the bay. Okay. So if we like the horse today, we're going to bet the bay. And if he can't win today, it's a bobtail nag. All right. So those are our options today are bet the bay or bobtail nag. Louie Rebeau thinking too much about these things. We're going a mile and an eighth on the dirt at Churchill Downs, $1 million on the line, a grade 1. I got to talk to Brooke Smith on Monday, who is the owner of Sierra Leone. I don't know what they're doing with this horse, and I'm not sure he does either. I'm just kidding, Brooke. Hi, it's nice to see you. But he is back in this field as the Breeders' Cup, the reigning Breeders' Cup classic winner. Mindframe obviously in here coming off back-to-back wins in graded stakes, Ed in the Pad Day Mile, and then in the Churchill Downs, of course, the Gulfstream Park Mile, not the Pad Day Mile, Gulfstream Park Mile, and then of course the Churchill Downs, a grade 1 here over 7 furlongs. We get Skippy Longstocking in here coming out of the Gold Cup, a grade 2 that he won. Mystic Dan wins last time out in the Blame the Prep for this race. He's the Derby winner from last year, moves him to 3 for 4 lifetime at the track. And oh, by the way, Hit Show's here, and all he did was win the Dubai World Cup. So let's meet the field one by one. We go to First Mission, who I didn't even mention on the inside. It comes in with a 109 buyer in this last race. Oh, what a grade 1. Let's go. Oh, my God. I'm so excited. We actually got a grade 1 here. First Mission, Bet the Bay or a bobtailed egg?
I think he's a Bet the Bay. I like this horse a lot. I think he is, you could look at it maybe as a Skippy Longstocking light in terms of, when he's gone up against grade 1 company, he's always come up short, but he's starting to collect these grade 2, grade 3 victories kind of up and down. But I think he's just gotten better as a 5-year-old, quite frankly. And I think, he's just a horse that's always been so lightly raced and lightly managed. I like him, though. I think he sits the perfect trip. I think he's going to sit behind the pace in this one, and he's going to have the rail. And I think he's absolutely at 4-1, a very playable horse in this spot, a very winnable race. My biggest concern is if you look the last 2 times he ran a career best buyer speed figure, there was a big drop off in that next race. So that is something to keep in mind after that huge 109 in that Oaklawn handicap. But I think he sits the trip. I think he's got the talent. He's obviously got the connections. And I think at 4-1, it's worth a shot, certainly to Bet the Bay.
I'm a Bet the Bay on him as well. And here's one of the angles that I was worried about with him was we have seen horses come up with good performances at Oaklawn that have not translated to Churchill this year.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about that with him. He's got a ton of experience here. His works here have been totally fine. He's obviously got a very comfortable home in the Cox Barn here. And so I'm very much not worried about that part. It's more of what you just described. We're coming off of about a month and a half, a little over 2 months now that I'm looking at my calendar properly here of time off for him. That's not always the best angle for him, but to be fair to him, usually he comes back in a massive spot, right? He's in the Vegas World Cup, or they're trying him straight away in the Razorback against a horse like Alexander Helios or a Banishing or what have you. It's usually that kind of spot, but I'm with you. He's one of the few horses here where the rail just doesn't bother me because, like you said, as long as it doesn't fall out of the gate and he's able to stall and be in position, they'll work out the trip later in the race. Mindframe comes in at 7-2. What a great price that would be. But to be fair, at the distance, he is over. Did run a 101 in the Haskell last year, over the mile and an eighth. Was in the stretch run. Dornick last year, no one was out stretch running that horse last year. It just was what it was. Comes in, like I said, off of back-to-back grade 2 and grade 1 wins here. We Bet the Bay, or is he a bobtail neck?
He is a Bet the Bay and my top pick, actually, in this race. He is a horse that I just have fallen in love with. Really, more and more I've watched him over the last couple of months. And you don't see horses like this anymore, Louie, that can win at 7. They can win at 8. They can win 8.5. They can win at 9. If it wasn't for Dornick, he'd have a win at 9 furlongs and 10 furlongs. He's never finished out of the exacta. I still don't know what his best distance is. That's the crazy part. And yet, I think a mile and 1/8 might be his best distance. And he showed last time that ability to really come from off the pace in that Churchill Downs. That was such a thrilling race. The other thing to keep in mind, Nisos came out of that race, ran a 99, came back to run a 108. And then you see Bookham Dano ran a 98, came out of that race to run a 102, winning the True North. So that those buyers are inching upwards and northwards for horses coming out of that race. I think that's a positive. Mindframe, just for me, I think this is the coming out party nationally that maybe he's been waiting for a little bit in terms of that older handicap division. Obviously winning that Churchill Down Sprint, big deal. But I think this is a race that could set him up for a really big summer, obviously, up here in Saratoga, and then the Breeders' Cup beyond that.
If someone wanted to make the case that the most consequential race to this point of the year is that Churchill Downs, I would listen to them. It would put the absolute nail in that conversation if Mindframe wins here. It would end the conversation altogether. The best gathering of horses this year would have been in the Churchill Downs. That wouldn't be a question at this point. I'm with you. We're getting back to whatever Todd Pletcher was before, like a 2-year lull in these kinds of races. Where he used to just be able to ship horses and it was like, oh, Todd's here. Okay. They're just get the trophy ready. Like it used to be, when he came, honestly, he came to Churchill with horses like this.
Yeah.
Sorry, Brad. Sorry, everybody else here. Like, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna bet the bay on this one as well. He's not my top selection here, but I do agree with you that it is fascinating that he's this good, Matthew, and we're not quite sure what all he can be best at, I should say. We know what he can do, which is everything, right? And frankly, if you look at these performances, we talk about that Belmont at 10 furlongs. He lost by a half length. I think we think of like Dornick as like kicking away from him in that race. They just happen to be so far apart from each other on that Saratoga surface that we forget that was actually like right there. I mean,
and we also forget that was his third race, and he was green as all get out in the stretch. And if Irad didn't startle him by going to the left-handed whip, he probably would have won that race potentially. I mean, maybe nobody outfinishes Dornick, but you really saw he was so green and gave up so much ground drifting further and further out in the stretch run that day. Just a supremely talented horse. And one where I kind of almost throw the speed figures out, because when your eye sees it, you just go, yeah, that horse has it.
There you go. We move on in the field to Skippy Longstocking. 33rd race of his career will be the Stephen Foster on Saturday. As far as I can remember, he has never won a grade 1, but does have multiple wins in graded stakes. Almost picked off the Woodward in the mud last year at Aqueduct. Of course, wins the Challenger at Tampa this year, as well. And of course, went out and won the Gold Cup out west. He's very difficult for me to handicap, Matthew. He reminds me, frankly, and I'm starting to love this about Safi. He's turning into a little bit of a Kenny McPeak with just spectacular chest hair. And that he's just willing to show up with these horses, man. I love this. I love that Skippy's in this race because I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to call him a bobtail nag here in this company.
Yep.
But he's not that. He isn't. And I expect him to get a good check on Saturday. I expect an honest effort from him. And frankly, that's why this division is so good, because in past years, he'd be the favorite in this race. He would be. 2 years ago, he would have been the favorite in this race. And so it's good to have a field deep enough for me that I can call Skippy, who has 11 freaking career wins and a bunch of graded stakes, a bobtail nag in this kind of field, because it's so grade 1-y. Where'd you land on Skippy?
Bobtail nag, and that kills me about it too, because I'm just like you. I mean, this is, anybody who listens to any of my stuff on NYRA Bets knows I love this horse. This is a horse that you used to have a lot of. Are they running? Great. We'll show up. We'll throw our name in the hat and see what happens. And 11 career wins, $37,000 purchase, who has won $3.6 million. Not a bad return on investment. And this is the sort of argument you see for running horses, and just keep running them. And Skippy just keeps getting better and keeps running well. And I don't think he's ever going to be that grade 1 winner, which is too bad, because I would love to see him get that added to his resume at the end of the day. But you're right. He cashes checks. He's honestly the horse. I think Midnight Bourbon would have been a better version of him, maybe, but he reminds me a lot of the late Midnight Bourbon, who was just always second and third and just always picking up checks and just always running honest every time. But Skippy, a great horse, and I think he's going to sit up probably a pretty nice trip. He could be controlling speed actually up on the front early, but I don't think he's quite good enough. And this group is just, I think, so talented that he's just a little bit of a bobtail nag.
Yeah, he's a third first so far this year. I would not be surprised to see him in third place again in this race.
Oh, I wouldn't either. Yep.
Sierra Leone comes in the 4-hole here, a second race this year after the New Orleans Classic, and frankly, a disappointing New Orleans Classic. Touch Upon a Star gets the win down there. He's behind Hall of Fame as well. A bunch of time off. We're not used to this kind of work tab for him, taking this amount of time off in his career. Matthew, how do you handicap him here? Is he a bet the bay or a bobtail nag?
Well, as a top pick, I already said I'm going with Mind Frame. So on a certain level, he's a bobtail nag. But for me, if you're playing horizontally, I'm going to probably hedge a little bit and say bet the bay. He's a tough horse to handicap, I agree. Because you go, is he pace dependent? And you go, well, you look at that Risen Star, and he ran behind 114 and change fractions, and he closed like a freight train at Fairgrounds. Well, yeah, but here's the thing. He's not running against Honor Marie and Resilience and Track Phantom anymore. This is deeper waters. So you look at the other two grade 1s he got, the Bluegrass and the Breeders' Cup Classic. They ran almost identical 6 furlong fractions in those two races, 110 and 4 basically. Is he going to get 110 and 4? I don't think he will. So there's a level of me where it goes, maybe he's a little pace dependent. There was always the buzz that he just didn't like Saratoga, that he didn't like the surface up there. Chad had made reference to that he just, was a little too speed favoring. He didn't really take to the track as well. I think it was particularly notable in the Travers where Torpedo Anna is out finishing Sierra Leone in that race to actually track down fierceness while Sierra Leone's kind of leveling out a little bit in the stretch. Then he goes to the Breeders' Cup Classic, and I joke, Chad Brown should buy Derma Sotogake and just take those two around the country together because Derma, I hope he got a piece of that winner's check because he absolutely helped Sierra Leone win that day. When you go that fast up front in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and you set it up, it's over. And Fierceness ran the best race, and Sierra Leone won. And it's one of those things where, so it's hard for me to judge. What I will say is a lot of times when I'm handicapping turf races, and I see a deep closer coming off a long layoff, I always go, well, sometimes I'm always hesitant to bet deep closers off long layoffs if that kick isn't necessarily there, that first start back after a long layoff. But we so rarely see that same running style in male dirt route races.
Right.
And I just didn't apply that same kind of logic. And I wonder maybe he just needed one under the belt. Chad's gotten the screws tightened a little bit more. I wouldn't shock me if he ran big, but I'm going to tentatively try to play against him. But I think in the pick 5 sequence, I'll probably just go too deep with him in mind frame.
I want to say this. I'm a little surprised to see the work tab is entirely on Long Island.
Oh, I'm not. Yeah.
Okay. You're not surprised they didn't ship him to Churchill for even one work?
That doesn't shock me with Chad necessarily, and the horse seems to really like Belmont and working out there. So I think he's always been a temperamental horse, and he likes things the way he likes things, and you just kind of let it go.
I think he wins on Saturday. I think he wins on Saturday. He's never missed the board at this distance. The third place was absolutely his worst race, maybe in his career.
Yeah.
And I watched his dad grow up. Biggest win bet I've ever placed was on a 1-2 gun runner in this race. And he won by 1,000. It was one of those. And so, no, I expect him to grow up here and I expect him to win here. And Sierra Leone will be back and we'll all go, yay, this division's awesome.
Yeah.
So there you go on that one. Mystic Dan, the Derby winner, is in here in the 5-hole, 3-1 on the morning line. I do not think he'll be 3-1 by the time we get to post. I think you'll get much better money on him than that number. But an interesting show because he was great in the blame, Matthew. I was there.
Yeah.
That one I was not there for. I had the flu. But no, he was spectacular in the blame and just a fun moment here in Louisville for that horse to get back to the winner's circle. Everybody get to see the Derby winner in the winner's circle across the track from the Derby winner's circle here. Bet the Bay, or is this one a bobtail nag?
Bobtail nag for me on Mystic Dan. I know. And he's just, listen, the best horse he beat last time was Antiquarian, who I'm a huge fan of, by the way. I'm like maybe the president of the Antiquarian fan club. I love that freaking horse and have for a long time since back before the Louisiana Derby where he broke through the starting gate. I've loved that horse for a while. And but the reality is that's the best horse he beat, and this is much deeper waters. One thing I will say, here's a little trivia for you, and I have to shout out my colleague Kaylee Shapiro who pointed this out. First time since 1992 that the top 2 finishers in the Kentucky Derby are facing off as 4-year-olds the subsequent year. The last time it happened, Nick Zito trained Strike the Gold and Best Pal in the Pimlico Special. So it's been a minute. And to your point,
Best Pal win the Pimlico Special?
Yeah. And no, Strike the Gold one. Yeah.
Oh, again. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Strikey won. So, but yeah, so it's great to see these 2 horses come back to the site of their amazing finish to layout last year. And I just think he's maybe a little in over his head in this race, and a ton of respect, and I'm thrilled that he won because the ongoing bit that I had about how many days it was since the Kentucky Derby winner won a subsequent race now is at 0 again. So it is, it was 1,255 days, and he's the one who broke the streak, and 6 days later, Sovereignty did it. And so, hey, it's pretty, not bad. So Mystic Dan, a ton of respect for Kenny. I love the new tattoo, but I'm going to be playing against him as a bobtail nag here.
I will say, not give my opinion on the tattoo. I'm going bobtail nag here. I remember talking with Lance Gasaway after the race, who's the owner of Mystic Dan, and just asking him, man, the 1 1/8 thing, did you think this was going to happen? And he said that he had personally gone to Kenny and said, are you sure he's a 1 1/8? He really feels like a miler, Kenny said, no. He just needs to get back. Give him some time. They ran him in that Pegasus. He was nowhere to be found. That was after having the van out for the Malibu, all that stuff. So I'm taking December and January with this horse, Matthew, and I'm completely discarding it as far as looking at his year.
Yeah.
I think his better race was actually in the Lake of Cheetah against Saudi Crown in that mile where he had to be on his game. He's off the bench 4 months in that one, shows up like a bat out of heck, comes up here and wins. Weirder things have happened than Mystic Dan winning the Stephen Foster on Saturday. Sure. I just want to say that. But I'm with you. I think the top three in this race are just a step better than he is. I just think they are. And so that's where we are in race 11. We're going through the Stephen Foster field. We are playing a spirited game of Bet the Bay or a bobtail nag with our guy, Matthew DeSantis from NYRA Bets. Hit Show comes in. And this is where I am not good at handicapping. And this is when horses come back from the Arabian Peninsula, whether they've had success or not. I'm used to that Arabian Peninsula bounce. And then we get Raging Torrent. We get these other horses that seem to just come back. No big deal. Hit Show coming out of a win in the Dubai World Cup. Florent Giroux keeps them out here for Brad Cox. Bet the Bay or bobtail nag?
He's bobtail nag for me, and a horse I always liked a lot, and honestly reminded me a little bit again of like a Skippy Longstocking type. Until that last race, I never thought he'd get that kind of grade one to some extent, and finally got it in such a huge effort. But for me, that's the thing, is that effort almost felt anomalous. It felt like that's not really the type of horse that he normally is, and so I do worry about that bounce coming back. You mentioned though, Raging Torrent, a horse a couple of years ago, Casa Creed used to do this, come back from overseas and run huge. So you can absolutely see it. I do think it's interesting. Casa was a sprinter. Raging Torrent's a miler. I do think going a little bit longer takes a little bit more out of you. And I worry about that. And these are deep waters. I mean, this is not just, him coming back and no disrespect, because I know they just started for entries, like Saudi Crown, when he came back and ran in that, R.A. Cowboy Jones, at Ellis Park. And it's like, this is a tough landing spot for a horse like Hit Show to do it off the bench. I mean, he looks great. I just saw him paddock schooling this morning, but still, for me in this field, he's a bobtail nag.
I want to be very clear. The opinions about the Cowboy Jones are Matthews and Matthews only. And then
one of my favorite names of any stakes race. Are you kidding me?
You go ahead and close your mouth right now. I'm talking, but the
you shut your mouth when you're talking to me.
You're talking to me. We will have Ellis Park Preview Hour on Rabo & Co. this coming Wednesday. Star-studded, by the way. We've already confirmed our first interview will be Tyler Gaffalione coming back off the bench. How about that? So that's spectacular.
Happy to see.
Very, very happy to hear from Tyler. And that was one of those, man. I don't even know what to send the guy. I legitimately, Matthew, I had no idea what to say to Tyler, because it was so, the timing could not, I cannot imagine being in those shoes. You have a sense of who your Derby mount's going to be and all the things. And it just, this sport, man, and I really do see you. I'm going to say Bet the Bay on him, man. And I think Raging Torrent's doing to me, but you know what really did it to me is the work the other day. This past weekend, I got the video of the work. He looks really comfortable and ready to go at Churchill Downs this weekend. I'm going to be hoping that 59 and change work that he just threw in is actually a harbinger of how well he's going to run this weekend. And so I will run with Hit Show as a Bet the Bay in this spot, believe it or not, ahead of Mystic Dan, which hurts my soul. All right, so let's get into Ashcroft. He'll break from the outside. We see the Lucas name next to him. Do you happen to have a Wayne Lucas story by chance? Did you get to spend much time with the coach?
I never got to spend much time with him. My only story, though, was last year. I was at the Pennsylvania Derby for Seize the Gray's victory. And the memory that I have of just, first of all, you have to understand, I'm 44. We're close to the same age. Growing up, there were three men that defined the Triple Crown. It was the coach, Bob Baffert, and Nick Zito. And I'm fortunate enough to have gotten to meet, Nick quite a bit over the last couple of months. I got to meet Bob Baffert recently, and that was a great interaction. And Coach, I remember being just so starstruck, standing in the paddock, probably about 6 feet away from him, and just being like, "There's the coach, there he is," and just being like, "There's the legend." And I just remember that was, of course, when Seize the Gray won. It was my racehorse. There were so many owners that they couldn't fit in the winner's circle at Parks, which is a big winner's circle. It's 3 times the size of Aqueducts, that's for sure. And so it's a huge winner's circle, and they had to go out onto the track to take the winning photo because there were so many people. And there was the coach with Seize the Gray, and it was just I was so glad to see that. And I was also so happy to see his late career renaissance. because it exposed so many new fans to this great human being and this great trainer who really revolutionized our sport in a way that maybe would have been more forgotten if he hadn't had horses like Secret Oath and Seize the Gray and American Promise.
Yeah, that Secret Oath.
And it was great it was amazing to see him. And I know when I was down at Churchill, there was a great moment early in the morning where he and Billy Mott were sitting on the saddle next to each other, watching the morning works. And that was a really special moment.
Yeah, we get spoiled down here for sure. And that that Lucas Gap and everything that we have down here at Churchill Downs. The other, Baz Nickel taking over. It's fascinating to watch. And now, unfortunately, we've got two of these, Matthew, up north, your place, in the Clement stable there, obviously with Miguel taking over. We're seeing these succession plans. And something I pointed out on Monday on the show was it's so interesting when these things happen and the plans are so obvious and they are seamless. Everybody's ready to go on the next stage of these how these barns are going to operate and everything else. And it's a credit to the two men that we've lost from the sport between Clement and Lucas, that they were ready for this moment. Right. And they're absolutely ready for this moment. And so kudos to both. I hate to lose them both in the same year for sure. But I got a great note from friend of the show, Steve Kornacki. And he said, I don't know why, but I just always assumed Wayne would be around. And I get it. That's exactly how I felt was all that stuff. We were really lucky. The Sunday before Preakness this year, Sean and I got to sit down with him in his office.
Oh, wow.
And 20 minutes, something like that. And just a spectacular time. We got to, and there was no script. There was no, you can't talk about this. It was just, hey, let's sit down and talk. We'll figure it out. It was awesome. So I'll miss having him around for sure, but the legacy indelible. We talk about coaching trees in other sports. His trainer tree is as good as it gets for sure. So
absolutely.
Ashcroft will break from the outside. Julian Leperoux will get the mount. This horse's last win came at Santa Anita in April of 2024. I'm not going to put Bobtail Nag on the screen out of respect, but this horse to me pretty much up the track here, Matthew. Similar?
Yeah, similar. But let me just say there's not going to be a dry eye in the house if this horse manages to win this race. I mean, forget about it. I mean, that just stop racing for the rest of the year. Give the Eclipse Award to the horse. Just mail it in. Because if this horse wins, that's as good as it gets. And you can't script it. I mean, it's just but yeah, I mean, a hard horse to come up with in this sort of a race. But he's got a couple of other horses. Wayne's got a couple of horses listed throughout the card on Saturday. He's got a horse in the very first race, $575,000 son of Charlatan, who's come off as a good first crop sire. Wouldn't be shocked if he does get a win, which would be really special, whether it's in the first race or the Stephen Foster.
There you go. Anything on Foster Day is an important race down here. The American Derby will close the card, race 12. We're going to mile and a 16th. This is the boys' version of the Tepin. This is for 3-year-olds, $250,000 in the line here, Matthew. And Freedom's Not Free is in here, and we've got a bunch of horses who really, really love to run late. Any chance this one just gets the lead and runs away?
It's possible because you're right. There isn't a lot of speed in this race. And when you look at it, there are a lot of late runners. Antonio Fresu, it's notable, he doesn't really run Churchill very often. So again, we talked about that earlier with another horse, those fractions out of Santa Anita, it's a little bit different when you're going up front with those fractions. And if you try to run that fast at Churchill, you're going to come back to everybody late. But from a pace standpoint, the horse, is more than good enough. From a speed figure standpoint to do it, it's just a matter of whether you can really divvy out the fractions and hold off some of these late chargers. But I think from a pace dynamic and anybody who's a pace capper, that one stands out like a sore thumb in this race.
Yeah, he certainly does. Tistastic is getting back to the turf here, but in a very unusual way. This is a horse that qualified for the Kentucky Derby on dirt. But before that, broke his maiden and then ran back. How many days apart was it?
6 days. Or 9 days. 9 days.
9 days apart at Kentucky Downs, where everybody shows that you could run a horse on 2 weeks rest every year at Kentucky Downs. But the rest of the year, it's not okay, by the way.
Can't do it.
Money talks. And so he does that. Do you consider Kentucky Downs a turf course?
But now you're really, after what I said about the R.A. Cowboy Jones, now you're really trying to get me in trouble.
You're never going to be allowed back in the state. That's exactly right.
No,
because I don't. Not for this. Not for the purposes of this race. Not for flat racing. I don't.
I think that is, if a horse is, the idea of horse for course is Kentucky Downs. like that is the example. Like if there is a horse that has only won at Kentucky Downs, then I need to see that horse. That horse is going to have to beat me at another track before I trust it. Conversely, if I see a horse just throws in a clunker at Kentucky Downs, if I see him throwing a clunker, I just go, okay, he didn't like Kentucky Downs. We'll move on to the next race. No big deal. So Tistastic is hard. You know, it's been a minute since he's come back. He was a 2-year-old in those races. Other horses have gotten better. I just don't think you can assume he's just going to pick up where he left off in the turf racing, and especially when you have a horse like Reagan's Wit for Cherie on the inside, who I think is a nice horse. And I'll be honest, the other one that I like, who I know you and I have talked a little bit about, was Flying Mohawk for Whit Beckman. That horse is at 8-1. That horse is on all my tickets at the Bay all the way.
Stephen Foster get a lot of free advertising on this show. The guy owes me a check. I don't know about this. Flying Mohawk is fascinating to me because he was on the rise as a turf horse before they tried the Ruby, and he was really, really good in the Ruby. I don't want to take anything away from him qualifying for the Derby and doing all those things. But we watched last year, and one of the things you and I argued about in 2024, probably our one big argument last year, was endlessly in the Derby, right?
Oh, yeah.
And by the way, boy, oh boy, have you been right about that. My goodness. And because we have not seen the best of him since then, unfortunately, by the way, because he was a very fine horse before the Kentucky Derby last year. Any concern about Flying Mohawk with that?
A little bit, certainly a little bit. I'm glad he wasn't quite as aggressively campaigned, maybe in some ways. And, they took a shot and it just didn't work out.
And once Joe knew they weren't going to win that race, Joe pulled off and was done. So this horse, it's not like Endlessly, who finished like 7th or 8th. I think.
That's the thing. They really
was driving at the end and really trying. I feel like that this was almost a bad workout for him or something.
In a lot of ways, yeah. I mean, it was kind of running towards the back of the pack pretty early and just said, okay, we're just going to, call it a day. And one of those things. But I think this horse, can get back. I like the fact they've given him a little bit of time off, and certainly, plenty of time to recover from that Kentucky Derby. And I think this one, again, when you look at price relative to talent, I think this one kind of stands out. And I remember, we were talking, this was one who was kind of on the rise going into that, race at Jeff Ruby Stakes, and I thought ran a really good race. And notable, Final Gambit came back to run 4th in the Kentucky Derby. So lost to an outstanding horse there, and I just think you get him back on the right surface. And again, at a longer price, absolutely willing to use this horse in my exotics and my horizontals.
Yeah, wanted to get your opinion on Minaret Station before we log off. This is a son of instilled regard. Did win the Bourbon at Keeneland. As a 2-year-old in October. We haven't seen him since. How are you handicapping him here?
Really hard. I mean, he's a bit of a toss for me, I think, in this spot. It certainly would not shock me if he won. Will Walden, pop down that. I mean, Will Walden it's such a good trainer and a trainer I really have come to like a lot and have a lot of respect for. Obviously, the story with Bless the Broken, but even beyond that, there was a great feature he did with Gabby Gaudet where he was imitating he was imitating Mike Maker doing an interview. He was imitating Todd Pletcher. He was imitating Brad Cox. He's got a sense of humor, which is honestly, we can't say that about many trainers anymore, but like, he's got a big personality. I find myself rooting for him as a younger guy in the sport. And so he's someone I like, and his horses are always well turned out. They're always, ready to roll. But this one just feels maybe like it needs a race. And you always wonder about that 2 to 3 first start as a 3-year-old this late into the season. That's a lot to do for horses that I think are in pretty prime condition.
Force out on all bets at Churchill. Closing day is Sunday. We are talking about Saturday. They're at Churchill Downs. Well, you know what? Whenever we have Matthew on, we bet the Bay. I'll tell you what. We appreciate him jumping on here on the Horse Racing Happy Hour. You know what? I get to see you in less than a month. That's God's work right there. There we go.
That's fantastic. In New Jersey, nonetheless.
In Jersey.
Even better.
You know what? Just dark hair and pizza. I was saying to a friend, there's very few places in the country that I go, and it's just obvious there's no chance I'm from there. And New Jersey is one of those places.
Yeah.
I was in Jamaica, Queens, visiting Aqueduct. You know what? No chance Louie grew up around there. Like, it's just no chance. It's not gonna happen. I go to New Orleans. They know Louie's not from Louisiana. It's totally fine. Like, there's a couple spots in this country. It's really obvious I'm not from there. Yeah.
What's funny is I look like I'm from those spots, particularly the first two, New Jersey and Long Island. I'm an Italian guy with a big nose, so everybody, just assume. The second I open my mouth and the second people talk to me, they're like, "Oh, you're not from around here. Yeah, I'm total bobtail nag. And it's so funny because, you know this about me, Louie. I grew up in Pennsylvania, but I lived until 2 years ago, I lived in the South my entire adult life.
Yep.
And when I talk to people who are up here, they go, "Oh, you have a bit of a Southern accent." I go, "I can't hear it at all." But like, okay, according to you, I do. And when I do these types of things, I tend to have more of an announcer voice. But like, yeah, I guess when I start getting kind of lazy, I a little bit of a twang comes out. And so, yeah, I usually pretty quickly knows that I'm not from Queens and I'm not from New Jersey.
Yeah, it's not laziness, by the way. It's comfort. Once you get comfortable.
It is comfort. You're absolutely right. It's too damn hot to be, so formal about things.
All right, we'll bet the Bay people. His name's Matthew DeSantis. Find him at Fail to Menace on the socials. Again, doing the exacta boosts up there at NYRA Bets.
Yep. Going to be a lot of fun. And we got content for you every day. Races across the country, across the world. Irish Derby this weekend. We got content for you. So make sure to check it all out on NYRA Bets.
There's a ton going on. Laurel's closing weekend is this weekend. Churchill's closing this weekend. So lots of mandatory payouts coming down the pike here at lots of different places. We're hoping, like this, that the pick six doesn't get picked off by somebody at Churchill Downs before Sunday. I think that thing could hit $1.5 million by Saturday and new money, easy $5-6 million on Sunday. So it could be a lot of fun.
Could be. I'm hoping. If there is, I'll have a ticket. That's for damn sure.
That's how that goes. All right, Matthew. Appreciate you, buddy. Have a great weekend.
All right. Thanks, Lou. You too.
All right. Matthew DeSantis at Failed to Menace on the socials. Appreciate him jumping in here on the horse racing happy hour. We'll be out there on Saturday. If you see me, say hey. You know where to find me as well, usually in section 320 with one of those cigars from Jay Shepherd Cigars. So if you are so inclined, head on over and say hi to our guy Jason there on Bardstown Road, 29 your way to the track, and get in on the stat with him. Get a free cigar with any purchase. He was Matthew DeSantis. This has been another rendition of the horse racing happy hour. Sorry, John Sherba. Yes, it was an hour and 11 minutes. Like the Russian novel. We'll be back next week. Oh, you are too. Top of the Indiana Derby. Get ready, people.